Rain didn't fall that night. It dripped, slow and cold, from the cracked gutter above the Miller apartment door. The street lamp across the road blinked like it was tired of watching this neighborhood struggle. Inside, 8-year-old Ava Miller sat on the top step with a soggy paper bag in her lap and exactly $5 in her small fist, her whole world folded into one wrinkled bill. A shadow moved at the end of the sidewalk. A man soaked, shaking, and far too thin for the coat. He stopped beneath the streetlight and stared at her like he was trying to remember what kindness looked like. Ava's fingers tightened around the money. Her stomach growled. And still, she stood up. Before we go any deeper, where are you watching from right now? I love imagining all of us spread across the world, meeting in the same moment for one story. Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far a little girl's kindness can travel tonight. Ava's mom, Grace, had told her not to sit outside after dark. But Grace was asleep on the couch, exhaustion, swallowing her whole one arm draped over her eyes like it could block out bills, worry, and the kind of pain you can't name out loud. The TV was on, volume low, showing a shiny world that never looked like theirs. Ava shouldn't have been out here. But hunger makes children brave in strange ways. The man stepped closer, careful, as if loud movement might break him. "Hey, sweetie," he said, voice rough like gravel. "Is this building 17B? Ava nodded, eyes wide. He stared at the door behind her, then at the soaked street. I think I got turned around." Ava's gaze dropped to his hands. They were red, shaking. He held an empty coffee cup like it was the last warm thing he'd ever owned. "You cold?" Ava asked softly. He tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "A little." Ava looked down at her $5 bill. Earlier that day, Grace had pressed it into Ava's palm with a tired kiss on the forehead. "For lunch tomorrow," she'd whispered. "Just something small, okay?" Ava had nodded like it was a secret mission. She tucked the bill into her pocket like treasure. $5 meant a sandwich. $5 meant not feeling empty in class dot, but now the man's lips were turning pale. His shoulders shook harder, and Ava suddenly remembered her teacher once saying, "Sometimes we're the only miracle someone meets all week." Ava stepped down off the stair and held out the bill. "You can have it," she said. The man blinked at her hand like he didn't understand what he was seeing. No, I can't take your money." Ava pushed it closer. "It's okay. My mom says you can't keep what you don't share." He stared at her for a long moment, eyes glossy, jaw clenched as if he was trying not to cry. Then he slowly reached out and took the $5 like it weighed 100 pounds. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice cracked on the last word. "You have no idea what this means." Ava shrugged, trying to act older than 8. "Buy something warm," she said, "and don't be scared." He let out a shaky laugh that sounded like it hurt. "I'll try." Then he did something strange. He crouched down and looked right into her eyes, like he was memorizing her face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ava." "Ava," he repeated softly, almost reverent. "I'm Daniel." She nodded. "Okay, Daniel." Daniel slipped the money into his pocket, then patted his coat like he was searching for something. He pulled out a silver pen, fancy, heavy-looking, and a small torn receipt. His hands shook as he wrote a few words on it. Then he folded it and placed it gently in Ava's palm. "If anything ever happens," he said slowly, carefully, "show this to someone you trust." Ava looked down. On the receipt, in shaky handwriting, was a phone number and one word: call. Ava swallowed. "Are you in trouble?" Daniel's eyes flickered away. "Sometimes life puts you there, even when you didn't choose it." Ava didn't fully understand, but she felt the fear behind his calm. A car passed, splashing water near the curb. Daniel flinched. his whole body tense like someone expecting to be chased. Ava's heart started beating faster. "Do you need help?" she asked. He looked at her again, this small girl in old sneakers, hair pulled back with a cheap clip, eyes too serious for her age. "You already helped," he said. "More than you know." He stood, backing away slowly. "Ava," he added, voice low, "promise me something." She nodded quickly. "Okay. Don't let this world make you hard." Ava's throat tightened. She didn't know why, but tears burned behind her eyes. "I won't," she whispered. Daniel gave one last look toward the dark street, then turned and disappeared into the rain, swallowed by the night like he'd never been real. Ava stood there, holding the folded receipt, $5 gone, stomach still empty, but chest strangely warm. Behind her, the apartment door creaked open. Grace stood there in a worn hoodie, eyes half open, confusion on her face. "Ava," she murmured, "what are you doing out here?" Ava spun around, panic flashing across her face. I was just... Grace's gaze dropped to Ava's empty hands, then to the rain, then back to Ava's face. "Where's the money?" Grace asked, voice suddenly sharper, fear hiding underneath. Ava hesitated. Then softly, she said, "I gave it to someone who looked colder than me." Grace froze, her mouth opened, then closed again. Her eyes filled with something heavy, anger, worry, and a kind of heartbreak that came from being too poor to afford kindness. "Ava," she whispered, stepping forward. "Baby, that was for your lunch." Ava's chin trembled. "I know, but he was shaking, and he looked like nobody cared." Grace stared at her daughter for a long time. Then she pulled Ava into her arms, hugging her tight, too tight, like she was holding on to the only good thing left in her life. "I hate this world sometimes," Grace whispered into her hair. "I hate that you have to make choices like that." Ava hugged back, small arms squeezing hard. They stood in the doorway together as the rain kept dripping and the street lamp kept blinking until Grace finally guided her inside. But even as Ava climbed into bed, stomach hollow, she kept the folded receipt under her pillow like a secret, and somewhere deep in the night, unseen by both of them, a black limousine rolled quietly through the city streets, headlights cutting through the rain, moving toward their address like destiny on wheels, and it wasn't stopping by accident. She didn't know it yet, but the next morning was going to knock on her door in a way that would change everything. The next morning arrived quiet and gray, like it was trying not to disturb the kind of families who slept in shifts rather than peace. Grace woke before her alarm, the way she always did when worry never fully let her rest. She stared at the ceiling for a long second, listening to the building breathe pipes clicking, a neighbor's distant cough, the faint hum of traffic outside. Then her eyes drifted to the kitchen table where yesterday's bills sat like threads. She swung her feet to the floor, rubbed her face, and went to check on Ava. Ava lay curled under a thin blanket, hair fanned across the pillow. For a moment, she looked exactly like she had when she was a toddler, small, innocent, untouched by the math of rent and groceries. Grace's chest tightened. She had been angry last night. Not because Ava was kind, but because kindness was expensive when you had nothing. Grace gently shook her daughter awake. "Ava, baby, time for school." Ava blinked up at her, then immediately glanced under her pillow like she expected the night to have changed something. Her small hand found the folded receipt and squeezed it. Grace noticed. "What's that?" she asked softly. Ava hesitated, then pulled it out. The paper was damp from the heat of her skin. She unfolded it carefully like it was sacred. Grace leaned in, reading the word call and the number underneath. Her brow furrowed. "Where did you get this?" "The man," Ava whispered. "Daniel. The one I gave the money to." Grace exhaled, slowly, exhaustion sinking deeper into her shoulders. Ava, you can't give strangers money, and you can't take things from them either. He wasn't scary, Ava said quickly, sitting up. He was just sad. Grace stared at the number again. It looked too clean, too deliberate, like something from a different world. She didn't recognize it. She didn't know why it bothered her. She folded the paper and handed it back. Put it away, she said. We're not calling anyone. Ava nodded, but her fingers held the receipt tighter. Grace moved to the kitchen. Their fridge held almost nothing half a carton of eggs, a small container of margarine, and a bottle of water. She made Ava toast from the last 2 slices of bread, cutting it into neat triangles like presentation could trick hunger. Ava ate quietly, eyes drifting toward the window. Asterisk outside. The street was wet and shiny from last night's rain. A school bus passed. A man walked a dog. Everything looked normal, like the world hadn't witnessed an 8-year-old make a choice that adults struggled to make. Then a low engine hum rolled down the street. Not loud, not aggressive, just deep and expensive. Grace didn't notice at first. She was rinsing a cup in the sink, mind already counting hours at her cleaning job. But Ava froze mid-bite, her eyes widening. Mom? She whispered. Grace turned. What? Ava pointed to the window. Grace wiped her hands on her hoodie and stepped closer. Black limousine was gliding down their street like it had no business being there. The car was long, polished, unreal its surface reflecting the gray sky like a mirror. It slowed as it reached their building. Then it stopped. Right in front of their door. Grace's stomach dropped. No, she breathed. No. That's not asterisk. A sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Both of them froze. The knock came again, calm, firm, controlled. Grace's heart started hammering. She instinctively pulled Ava behind her, like her body could shield her daughter from anything. Ava, she whispered, go to your room. Ava shook her head, terrified and curious all at once. Mom, what if it's now? Grace hissed, trying to keep her voice steady. Ava hesitated, then stepped back toward the hallway, but she didn't go far. She stayed just out of sight, peeking around the corner with wide eyes. Grace approached the door slowly. Her hand hovered over the lock. Another knock, gentler this time. Almost patient. Grace swallowed, then opened the door a crack. A man in a dark suit stood outside, holding a small leather folder. His posture was straight, his hair neat, his expression neutral in a way that screamed professionalism. Behind him, the limousine sat like a silent beast. Good morning, he said politely. Grace Miller? Grace's throat went dry. Yes. He glanced down at a tablet, then back up. I'm here regarding Ava Miller. Grace's skin went cold. What about my daughter? The man kept his tone calm. May I come in for a moment? I assure you, ma'am, this is not a police matter. Grace didn't relax, but she stepped aside cautiously, keeping one hand behind her as if she could still push the door shut if needed. The man entered, removing his shoes without being asked, a small detail that made him feel less like a threat and more like someone trained to respect people's homes. He looked around. Briefly, the small living room, the worn couch, the unpaid bills, the peeling paint. His eyes didn't judge. If anything, they softened. My name is Mr. Keller, he said. I represent the Hartwell Foundation. Grace stared. I don't know what that is. Mr. Keller nodded as if he expected that. He opened the leather folder and pulled out a photo. Grace's breath caught. It was a blurry security camera, still Ava on the steps last night, holding out the $5 bill, and Daniel crouched in front of her. Grace's knees nearly buckled. How did you? She whispered. Ava gasped from the hallway. Mr. Keller's gaze flickered toward the sound. Hello, Ava. he said gently, not startled. You don't need to hide. Ava stepped into view slowly, clutching the folded receipt like armor. Mr. Keller's expression softened further. He lowered himself slightly so he wasn't towering over her. Ava, he said, voice careful, do you remember the man you helped last night? Ava nodded. Mr. Keller inhaled slowly, like the words mattered. That man was Daniel Hartwell. Grace's eyes widened. Hartwell. Mr. Keller nodded once. The Daniel Hartwell, he said quietly. The philanthropist, the founder, the man whose name is on hospitals, shelters, scholarships. Grace's mouth fell open. Ava blinked, confused. He was cold. Yes, Mr. Keller replied softly. He was, because he left a very important place last night, and he did it alone. Grace's heart pounded painfully. Why are you here? Mr. Keller glanced at Ava, then back to Grace. Because, he said, your daughter gave him the last $5 she had. And when he got into his car later, he cried. Ava's eyes filled with tears. Instantly, Grace stared at her child. Disbelief and fear mixing in her chest. Mr. Keller's voice softened even more. And this morning, Mr. Hartwell asked us to find her. If you were standing in Grace's place right now, door open, a limousine outside, your child suddenly connected to a stranger's hidden life, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. And if this moment is already pulling at your heart, tap like, because kindness like Ava's deserves to be seen. Mr. Keller lifted the folder again, turning to a page with official-looking papers. Mr. Hartwell would like to meet Ava, he said. Today, Grace's breath shook. No, she whispered immediately. No, I don't even know you people. I don't know what this is, Mr. Keller nodded, calm. I understand your fear. Completely. He paused, then let me say this plainly, he added. Ava's $5 didn't just buy him coffee. It stopped him from doing something irreversible. The room went still. Grace felt her blood turn to ice. Ava clutched the receipt so hard her knuckles A-N-E-D. Mr. Keller's eyes held steady, sincere. He was going to disappear last night, he said, not just from the street, from life. Grace's hand flew to her mouth, and Ava's breath caught in a tiny, broken sound, like a child realizing her kindness had been the last thread holding a stranger to the world. Mr. Keller stepped back slightly. Giving them space, he wants to thank her, he said, and he wants to do something in return. Grace's legs trembled. She looked at Ava, this small girl in pajamas, eyes shining with fear and compassion, and realized something terrifying. Last night wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point, and whatever was coming next was already waiting in that limousine outside. Grace's first instinct was to slam the door and lock every bolt, as if fear could be kept out by wood and metal. Her second instinct was to hold Ava so tightly the world couldn't take her away, but the limousine wasn't leaving. It waited outside like a quiet question. Mr. Keller didn't move to hurry them. He simply stood with his folder tucked under one arm, posture respectful, eyes soft in the way people learn when they've delivered life-altering news before. Grace swallowed, throat dry. You're saying that man, Daniel Hartwell, was going to Mr. Keller nodded once, not dramatic. Just honest. Grace's knees weakened. She leaned a hand on the kitchen counter to steady herself. Her mind raced through images. Ava on the steps, rain dripping, that man's shaking hands, his pale lips. She remembered how Ava had described him, sad. Not scary, just sad. Ava stepped closer to her mother, small fingers gripping the hem of Grace's hoodie. Mom, did I save him? She whispered. Grace's heart cracked at the question. She looked down at her daughter and saw something. She didn't want the world to touch pure compassion that still believed. People could be helped. Grace crouched and cupped Ava's face. You were kind, she said, voice shaking. That's what you were. Mr. Keller cleared his throat gently, as if reminding them the moment was still moving. Mr. Hartwell is at St. Maron's private clinic, he said. He asked that. Ava come. He specifically asked for her. Grace's eyes narrowed. Why a clinic? Is he sick? Mr. Keller hesitated. He's recovering emotionally, physically. It's been a difficult month. Grace stared at him. And you think, I'm just going to put my child in a limousine and go meet a billionaire stranger? Mr. Keller didn't flinch. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't safe. There will be security, staff, and I will be with you the entire time. If at any moment you feel uncomfortable, we leave. Immediately, Grace's lips parted to refuse again until she saw Ava's face. Ava wasn't excited like a child seeing something fancy. She looked worried, like her heart had followed Daniel into the night and never fully came back. She pulled the folded receipt from her pocket and held it up. He gave me this, she said softly. He said if anything happens, show it to someone I trust. Grace's throat tightened. And you trusted me. Ava nodded. Mr. Keller looked down at the receipt like it was more powerful than $1 million contract. He remembers you, he said quietly. He's been asking for you since dawn. Grace shut her eyes for a second. She thought of their life, the overdue rent notice, the school lunch form Ava had hidden because she didn't want to be a problem, the way Grace worked until her hands cracked and still came home smiling so her child wouldn't feel the weight. Grace had taught Ava to be kind, but she'd never imagined kindness would drag them into a world this big and this dangerous. Grace opened her eyes. Let me change, she said. And let Ava change, then we'll talk. Mr. Keller nodded. Of course. In Ava's room, Grace pulled out the cleanest dress she could find, one Ava wore only on special days, the fabric slightly faded from too many washes. She brushed Ava's hair carefully, smoothing flyaways with water because they didn't have fancy products. Ava sat still, unusually quiet. Finally, she whispered, Mom, what if he's still sad? Grace's hands paused mid-braid. Then we'll be gentle, she said softly. Ava looked at her in the mirror. What if I made it worse? Grace's chest tightened. She turned Ava gently to face her. Oh, baby, she whispered, voice breaking. You didn't make anything worse. You gave him a reason to stay. Ava's eyes filled. She nodded quickly, wiping tears with the back of her hand. Have you ever had someone help you when you felt like the world forgot you? If yes, type yes and tell me their name. Sometimes saying it out loud is how we honor the ones who kept. Standing, when they stepped outside, the air was colder than it looked. The limousine door opened smoothly. Grace hesitated, scanning the street like she expected cameras to pop out, neighbors to whisper, danger to leap from shadows, but the driver simply bowed his head politely. Ava Miller? He asked gently. Ava nodded. Welcome, he said. We'll take very good care of you. Grace climbed in first, pulling Ava close. The interior smelled like clean leather and quiet wealth. The seats were soft, the windows tinted, the world outside fading into a blur like they were crossing into a different life. Ava pressed her forehead to the glass. Watching their neighborhood slip away, laundromats, cracked sidewalks, small shops with handwritten signs. Her world shrinking behind her. Grace held her hand the whole time. They arrived at the clinic within 20 minutes. St. Maron's looked less like a hospital and more like a hotel. White stone walls, tall glass doors, fresh flowers lining the entrance. Grace felt out of place instantly. Mr. Keller guided them through security and down a silent hallway where everything smelled like antiseptic and expensive calm. At the end of the hall, he stopped outside a door. He's in here, he sighed. You can take your time. If Ava wants to leave, we leave. Grace nodded slowly. Then she knocked. A voice from inside, weak but clear, called, "Come in." Mr. Keller opened the door. The room was dim, curtains half drawn. A man sat in a chair near the window, wrapped in a blanket, though the room looked warm. His face was paler in daylight, his cheekbones sharp. But his eyes lifted toward Ava like they had been waiting all their life for something good. "Ava," Daniel whispered, voice cracking. Ava froze in the doorway, hand gripping her. "Mothers." Daniel's gaze filled with tears immediately. He tried to stand, but his body betrayed him. He sank back into the chair, hand trembling. I thought you were a dream," he said. Ava stepped forward slowly. "You're not cold today," she whispered. Daniel let out a broken laugh, then shook his head, tears spilling. "No," he whispered. "Because of you, I'm still here." Grace stood frozen, watching a powerful man look at her little girl like she was salvation. Daniel reached out his shaking hand, palm up, an invitation. Ava hesitated only a second. Then she placed her small hand into Daniel's fingers, closed gently around hers like he was afraid she might vanish. "I was going to end it," he whispered, voice barely holding together. "Last night, I had already decided." Grace's breath caught sharply. Ava's eyes widened, filling with tears. Daniel squeezed her hand. "But then you looked at me like I mattered," he said. "And you gave me your last $5. Like hope was something you could hand to a stranger." Ava's chin trembled. "I didn't want you to be scared," she whispered. Daniel nodded, sobbing quietly now. "And you saved me from myself." Grace pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping down her face. Daniel wiped his own tears with the back of his hand, trying to steady his voice. "I asked them to find you," he said. "Not to reward you like a headline, but because I owe you a life, and I need to do something with mine that finally means something." He looked at Grace, then eyes full of remorse and sincerity. "Ms. Miller," he whispered, "I'd like to help your family, not with pity, with purpose." Grace's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a slow breath, then nodded toward a small envelope on the table. Mr. Keller picked it up and held it out. Grace stared at it, hands trembling. Something in her knew whatever was inside was about to change everything. And Ava, still holding Daniel's hand, didn't realize that her $5 kindness had just opened a door far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Grace's fingers hovered over the envelope like it might burn her. In her world, envelopes from important people usually meant late notices. Fees, warnings, never helped. Daniel watched her with a strange humility, like he understood the fear of accepting anything when life had trained you to expect a price. "It's not a trap," he said softly, voice thin but steady. "It's a door. You can walk through it, or not. You're in control." Grace swallowed, eyes stinging. She looked at Ava, first Ava, standing beside Daniel, small hands still wrapped in, his face full of concern rather than excitement. Her daughter wasn't dazzled by the clinic or the limousine, or the fact that this man's name belonged to buildings and headlines. She was simply worried he might disappear again. Grace's throat tightened. Slowly, she took the envelope. Inside was a letter neatly typed on thick paper. Grace read the first line, and her breath caught. It wasn't a contract. Not yet. It wasn't a demand. It was an apology. "To Ava Miller, thank you for reminding me that I am still human." Grace's eyes blurred. Daniel's voice was gentle. "Keep reading." Grace did. The letter explained that Daniel Hartwell had been living under pressure that no one saw, lawsuits, betrayal, a family tragedy he couldn't speak about. He'd spent years giving money to the world while feeling empty inside. Last night, he had walked away from his driver and his security, wandered the city alone, and reached a moment so dark he didn't believe morning deserved to find him. Then he found Ava. Grace's hand shook as she read the next part. Ava gave me her last $5 without knowing my name, my status, or my pain. She gave it because she saw a stranger shaking in the rain and decided he mattered. Grace pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed. Daniel's eyes shone. That $5, he whispered. It was more valuable than everything I own. Ava's lips trembled. Are you okay now? She asked. Daniel looked at her like the question itself was medicine. I'm trying, he said, and today I'm here because you gave me a reason to fight for tomorrow. Grace wiped her cheeks quickly, embarrassed by her tears, but Daniel didn't look away. He didn't judge. He seemed almost grateful. For her honesty, he nodded toward the second page. Grace turned it. And there it was. Numbers that didn't look real. A scholarship fund. A housing grant. Medical coverage for Grace's chronic wrist pain she'd ignored for years. A monthly stipend for basic living to remove the immediate weight of survival. It wasn't written like charity. It was written like restoration. Grace's knees nearly gave out. She sat down slowly in the nearest chair, letter trembling in her lap. No, she whispered. This is too much. Daniel's expression tightened, pained. It's still not enough, he said softly. Not compared to what she gave me. Grace looked up at him, voice breaking. We don't take things like this. People don't just... Daniel lifted a hand gently. I'm not people, he said. I'm a man who almost made the worst choice of his life. And your daughter stopped me with $5 and a look that said I was worth saving. Grace covered her mouth again, sobbing quietly. Ava watched her mother, confused and scared. Mom, she whispered, did I do something wrong? Grace shook her head rapidly and reached for her. No, baby. You did something beautiful. Ava stepped into her mother's arms, small body trembling. Daniel watched them, his face twisted with emotion. I don't have children, he admitted, voice low. I wanted them once, but life happened. And then I thought the world didn't need me anymore. He looked at Ava. But you, his voice cracked. You reminded me that it does. Now it's your turn. Tell me one small good thing you did recently, something simple, something nobody applauded. Drop it in the comments so others remember kindness is still alive. And your words might be the reason someone keeps going tonight. Grace tried to breathe normally. She looked at the papers again, then at Mr. Keller, searching for hidden strings. What do you want? She asked, voice raw. People like you don't do this without something. Mr. Keller spoke calmly. Ma'am, Mr. Hartwell asked for one thing only. Grace's throat tightened. What? Mr. Keller glanced at Daniel, then back to Grace. He asked to see Ava again. Ava blinked. Why? Daniel's eyes softened. Because, he said quietly, I need to remember what you did. I need it to stay real. So I don't ever go. Back to that night, Ava's brows knit. She looked at Grace, then back at Daniel. Are you lonely? She asked simply. Daniel's lips parted, stunned by the innocence of it. Then he nodded slowly. Yes, he whispered. Very. Ava thought for a moment, then said, you can be not lonely with us. Sometimes. Grace's breath caught sharply. Daniel's eyes filled again. He covered his face briefly with one hand, shoulders shaking. When he lowered it, he looked at Ava like she had just given him a second rescue. I would like that, he whispered. More than you know. Grace's heart felt like it was splitting, fear on one side, gratitude. On the other, she stared at the paperwork again. A home, security, food, a future. She thought of Ava's hollow cheeks some mornings. Ava's quiet embarrassment at free lunch forums. Ava saying, it's okay, Mom, when it WASN single quotes T. Grace slowly looked at Daniel, if we accept this. She said carefully, it doesn't mean you own us. Daniel's expression turned earnest. I don't want ownership, he said. I want to repay a debt I can never fully repay. And I want to become the kind of man who deserves the life your daughter saved. Grace held his gaze. For the first time since the limousine arrived, she saw something beyond the money. A broken man trying to rebuild himself. Ava stepped forward again. Standing beside Daniel's chair, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded receipt. Do you want this back? She asked. Daniel smiled weakly. No, he whispered. Keep it. That's proof you were real. That you happened. Ava nodded solemnly, tucking it away like a treasure. Then Daniel's gaze shifted to the window. Outside, a security guard stood discreetly. A car idled. A world waited. He exhaled slowly. There's something else, he said. Grace stiffened. What? Daniel's jaw tightened, a shadow crossing his face. The reason I was alone last night, he said quietly, was because the people I trusted most are the reason I lost everything. The chill crept up Grace's spine. Daniel's eyes darkened with a pain deeper than sadness. I didn't just walk away, he whispered. I was running. Ava's small fingers tightened around her mother's hand, and in that moment, Grace understood something terrifying. The limousine wasn't just a gift. It was also a sign that whatever Daniel was escaping might now be finding its way toward them too. Grace's body went rigid. Her instincts, honed by years of scraping by, didn't care about wealth or polished clinics. Instincts only cared about one thing, danger. What do you mean? You were running? She asked, voice low. Daniel's gaze stayed on the window as if the outside world could suddenly become a threat again. He swallowed, throat bobbing, and for the first time since they entered the room, he looked scared. I built my foundation with trust, he said, with people I thought were family, even if they weren't blood. Mr. Keller shifted slightly, eyes tightening. He already knew where this was going. Grace could feel it in the way the air changed. Daniel continued, voice strained. My CFO, Michael Reeves, and my business partner, Lena Hartwell. Ava blinked. Hartwell? Like you? Daniel's mouth tightened. She's my sister? Grace felt her stomach drop. Daniel's fingers gripped the blanket around his shoulders. They've been moving money, quietly, for months. Taking pieces where nobody would notice. And when I found out, he exhaled sharply, they didn't apologize. They threatened me. Grace's skin went cold. Mr. Keller spoke carefully. They told him if he exposed them, they would destroy him publicly, ruin his name. And worse, Grace's voice shook. Worse what? Daniel's eyes flickered toward Ava, then away because he couldn't bear to look at her. While saying it, they said they'd make it look like I was unstable, he whispered. Like I couldn't be trusted. Like I was dangerous. Ava's small hand tightened around Grace's fingers. Are you dangerous? She whispered. Daniel turned to her slowly, eyes glossy with tears. No, he said. I'm hurt. I'm tired. I'm human. But I'm not dangerous. Grace pressed Ava closer to her side, protective. Daniel's voice broke. Last night, he admitted, I believed them. I believed maybe the world would be better without me fighting. I believed my own life was already taken. Grace's throat tightened painfully. Mr. Keller added quietly, and when he left his security detail, he did it because he wanted 1 hour where nobody could manage him, spin him, or threaten him. Just silence. Grace pictured him in the rain again. The shaking hands. The empty coffee cup. The way he'd looked at Ava like she was light in a tunnel. And then you met my daughter. Grace whispered. Daniel nodded. And she gave me $5, he said softly. And somehow that felt like proof that not everyone takes. Grace stared at him, chest heaving. She'd lived her whole life being judged like poverty made you suspicious, like desperation made you less worthy of safety. And now a billionaire was sitting in front of her saying her daughter reminded him of humanity, but the fear still clung to her ribs. If they threatened you, Grace said, why are we here? Why are you bringing us into this? Daniel's face twisted with guilt. I didn't want to, he whispered. But they already know someone helped me last night. My driver saw me come back with wet clothes. Security reviewed street cameras. They'll trace it. They always trace it. Grace's mouth went dry. Trace it to us. Daniel nodded, ashamed. Ava's eyes widened, tears filling them. Did I make trouble for Mom? She whispered. Grace's heart shattered at the trembling in her daughter's voice. She knelt and cupped Ava's cheeks firmly. No, she said, voice fierce. Listen to me. You did something brave. If anyone makes trouble, it's because they're wrong, not because you were kind. Daniel watched. Pain etched across his face. I'm sorry, he whispered to Grace. I never wanted your family caught in my storm. Grace rose slowly, eyes burning. Then keep us out of it. Take back the money. Take back the... No, Ava said suddenly. Both adults froze. Ava stepped forward, small chin lifted, tears still on her lashes. He needed help, she said softly. He was shaking. People shouldn't... Leave people. Daniel's eyes filled again. Grace's voice cracked. Ava, sweetie. Ava looked at her mother with the most heartbreaking calm. Mom, if I didn't help him and he disappeared, I would feel that forever. Grace's breath caught. If that moment hit you hard, leave it. Sometimes one small symbol says what your heart can't put into words. Daniel wiped his face, trying to steady himself. I'm going to fight, he said, voice stronger now. For my name, for my foundation, for my life. And I'm going to do it without using you as shields. Grace stared at him. How? Daniel nodded toward Mr. Keller. Keller is arranging protection. Real protection. Not just guards, legal, financial, everything. And I want to move you two somewhere safe, temporarily. Grace's eyes narrowed. Where? Daniel exhaled. A guest house. On a secured property. Until we stabilize things. Grace's shoulders tensed. That sounds like a cage. Daniel shook his head quickly. It's not. You can leave whenever you want. You'll have privacy, freedom, but safety. And food and rest. Grace looked down at Ava. She saw the thinness in her cheeks. The tiredness in her little shoulders that no child should carry. Grace had told herself she could handle everything alone, but now her daughter's kindness had cracked open a door. And behind that door was risk. But also survival. Mr. Keller spoke gently. Double quotes, Ms. Miller. I can give you my personal number. My home address. You'll have full information. We won't move you without your consent. Grace hesitated. Her mind screamed, don't trust this. Her heart whispered this could save Ava. Ava tugged her sleeve. Mom, she whispered, I don't want you to be scared. We can go just for a little, and if it feels wrong, we leave. Grace stared at her daughter, stunned by the maturity in her voice. Daniel leaned forward slightly, voice quiet. I don't want to replace her father, he said softly, as if he sensed something unspoken. I don't want to replace anything, I want the chance to repay what I owe. And I want to prove to Ava that her kindness didn't make the world darker. It made it brighter. Grace's eyes burned. She wanted to say no, but her life had been nothing but no money. Number time, no help, no rest. And Ava deserved at least one yes. Grace swallowed hard. Okay, she whispered. Temporarily. Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief. Mr. Keller nodded once. Immediately stepping aside to make a call, Ava exhaled, a tiny breath of courage. But as Mr. Keller moved toward the door, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and something sharp flashed across his face. He looked at Daniel. "Sir," he said quietly. "They found the street footage." Daniel's face drained of color. Grace's heart stopped. Mr. Keller's voice lowered. "Your sister's team is asking questions about a little girl, about an address." Ava clutched Grace's hand. And in that instant, Grace understood the truth fully. The limousine that had arrived at their door wasn't just the beginning of a miracle. It was also the moment the storm finally learned their name. Asterisk, the drive to the guest house felt longer than it should have. The limousine moved smoothly through the city, but inside the air was tight, heavy with things left unsaid. Ava sat in the middle seat, feet dangling, clutching her backpack like it might disappear if she let go. Grace sat beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the window as familiar streets faded into unfamiliar wealth. Daniel sat across from them, quiet now. Not the broken man from the rain, not the grateful one from the clinic, but someone in between, someone bracing for impact. Grace finally broke the silence. "You said your sister did this," she said flatly. "Why?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Because I trusted her more than anyone. And because power changes people when they think they deserve more." Ava looked up. "Does she hate you?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I think that's the worst part. I think she convinced herself I didn't matter anymore." Grace felt a strange ache at that, how familiar it sounded. People didn't always hate you when they hurt you. Sometimes they just decided you were optional. The limousine turned onto a long private road lined with trees and security gates. The guest house came into view, small compared to mansions nearby, but still larger than anything Grace had ever lived in. When they stepped inside, warmth wrapped around them. Clean, quiet, safe. Ava walked slowly from room to room, touching the couch, the curtains, the kitchen counter, like she was afraid it would vanish if she moved too fast. "Mom," she whispered, "there's so much space." Grace swallowed. "Yeah, baby." Daniel stood near the doorway, hands in his pockets. "You'll have privacy here," he said gently. "No staff unless you ask. I'll stay on the main property. This is yours." Grace turned to him sharply. "And if your sister shows up?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "She won't, and if she tries, she won't get close." A pause. "Grace," he added, quieter now, "I need to ask you something difficult." Grace stiffened. "What?" "If things get ugly," he said, "if my name gets dragged, if lies spread, I might need to publicly admit how bad things were for me. That I was struggling." Grace's eyes narrowed. And that your daughter helped me. Asterisk. Her breath caught. "Absolutely not." Daniel nodded immediately. "I expected that. I won't do it without your consent, ever." Ava looked between them. "Why would you tell people?" Daniel crouched slightly so he was at her level. "Because sometimes the truth protects you, and sometimes it costs you." Grace crossed her arms. "My child is not a shield for your reputation." Daniel met her gaze without flinching. "I know. That's why I'm asking, not deciding." The tension hung thick. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet. She padded into the living room where Grace sat curled on the couch, staring at nothing. "Mom?" Ava whispered. Grace opened her arms instantly. Ava climbed in, resting her head against Grace's chest. "Did I mess things up?" Ava asked softly. Grace's heart broke cleanly in two. "No," she whispered fiercely. "You didn't mess up anything. You did what adults forget how to do." Ava blinked up at her. "What? You saw someone hurting, and you cared?" Ava was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you think his sister was hurting too?" Grace froze. That question landed harder than any threat. Asterisk. Grace hadn't thought about Daniel's sister as a person only as danger. But Ava's mind worked differently. It always had. "I don't know," Grace admitted. "Maybe." Ava's voice was small. "Sometimes people hurt others because they're scared." Grace closed her eyes. Across the property, Daniel sat alone in his office, lights dim, staring at old photos on his phone. Him and his sister as kids, laughing, trusting, before money complicated love. His phone buzzed. A message from Lena. "You should have stayed gone." Daniel's hands trembled. He typed, deleted, typed again. Nothing he could say would fix this. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, wondering if forgiveness was weakness or the last strength left. Be honest, if someone betrayed you the way Daniel was betrayed, could you forgive them? Type forgive if you could, or never if it would break you too deeply. The next morning, everything exploded. News alerts, emails, calls. Daniel's name trended online half-truths, whispers, accusations. Stories painting him as unstable, dangerous, a liability. Grace watched the headlines on her phone, blood draining from her face. "They're destroying you," she whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. Exactly as planned. Ava sat at the table, drawing quietly. She looked up. "Are you going to disappear again?" Daniel's chest tightened. He walked over and knelt beside her. "No," he said firmly. "Not this time." "But they're mean," Ava said simply. "Yes," he agreed. "And I can't control that." She studied his face carefully. "But you can choose to stay." He nodded, eyes shining. "I can." A knock echoed through the guest house. Grace's heart jumped into her throat. She moved instinctively in front of Ava. Mr. Keller entered, face pale. "Sir," he said to Daniel, "your sister has gone public." Daniel closed his eyes. "She's accusing you of misusing funds," Keller continued. "And she mentioned a child." Grace's breath hitched sharply. "What?" Daniel's eyes snapped open. "What did she say?" Keller swallowed. "She implied you manipulated a minor to gain sympathy." Ava froze. Grace's hands shook with rage. "That's a lie." Daniel stood, face hardening into something new, not broken, not scared, but resolved. "That's it," he said quietly. "I'm done hiding." Grace turned to him. "Daniel, I won't use Ava as a shield," he said firmly. "But I will tell the truth. All of it." Ava stood slowly, clutching her drawing. "It's okay," she said softly. "I wasn't scared when I helped you. I'm not scared now." Daniel looked at her, the small girl who had already faced more than most adults. And in that moment, he realized the climax wasn't about revenge. It was about courage and choosing not to disappear, even when the world tried to erase you. Outside, cameras were already gathering. The storm had arrived, and Daniel was finally ready to stand in it. Asterisk, the first camera flash popped like lightning outside the gates. Then another. Then the low, constant murmur of voices, reporters stacking rumors like bricks. Grace peeked through the curtains and felt her stomach drop. A cluster of news vans sat on the road outside the property. People held phones up like weapons, hungry for a story, not a truth. Ava stood behind her, small fingers gripping the edge of Grace's shirt. "Are they here for you?" Ava asked Daniel quietly. Daniel nodded, jaw tight. "They're here for a headline." Mr. Keller spoke fast, controlled. "We can move you through the private exit to the main house. A statement can be released without you appearing." Daniel shook his head once. "No." Grace spun toward him. "Daniel, you don't have to stand out there. You can fight in court quietly, safely." Daniel's eyes met hers, tired, bruised, but steady. I spent my whole life hiding behind money and lawyers, he said, and it didn't protect me from my own darkness. Ava didn't save me so I could run again. Grace's throat tightened. Ava stepped forward, clutching her drawing to her chest. It was a simple picture, 3 stick figures holding hands under a big sun. Ava had labeled them in shaky letters. Ava, Mom, Daniel. Daniel stared at it like it was sacred. I drew it so you remember. Ava whispered. When it gets loud? Daniel's breath hitched. He crouched to her level. I will remember, he said softly. Every second, Grace's eyes filled. She didn't want this. She didn't want her child anywhere near this storm. But she also saw something happening, something she hadn't expected. Daniel was changing, not because his reputation was threatened, because a little girl believed he could be better. Daniel rose and straightened his shoulders. He looked at Mr. Keller. Get my legal team, he said. But more importantly, get the clinic director. Get the therapist. I want them present. I'm not ashamed of needing help. Mr. Keller blinked, surprised. Sir, that's risky. Daniel nodded. So was staying alive last night? Grace felt a chill race up her spine. Then anger followed. They called Ava manipulated, she said through clenched teeth. They're dragging my daughter's name into their mess. Daniel's eyes darkened with something protective. I won't let them touch her, he promised. Grace studied his face. Promises mean nothing if they don't become actions. Daniel held her gaze. Then watch my actions. Keller's phone buzzed again. He listened, face tightening. They're escalating, he said quietly. Lena's team is claiming you staged the street encounter. They're saying the limo at the girl's home proves it was planned. Grace's breath caught. Planned? We didn't even have food in the fridge. Ava's eyes went wide. Why are they lying? Daniel exhaled slowly. Because lies are easier than guilt. He turned toward the door. Grace grabbed his sleeve. Daniel, what if they twist your words? What if they... Daniel placed his hand over hers gently, grounding. Grace, he said softly, I won't speak to them like they own me. I'll speak like I'm human. Ava stepped closer, looking up at him. Can I come? She asked. Grace immediately shook her head. No. Ava's face fell. Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to put her in danger. But he also knew something. Ava's presence wasn't just comfort. It was truth. He looked at Grace carefully. I won't bring her near the crowd, he said. But I want her to see that staying is possible. That we don't run from ugly things, we face them with good hearts. Grace's eyes stung. She wanted to say no again. Yet she saw Ava's trembling courage. The way her daughter's kindness wasn't naive, it was chosen. Grace swallowed hard. She stays behind the gate, she said firmly. With me. Daniel nodded. Agreed. Minutes later, they stood inside the property's inner gate. Security formed a line. Beyond the metal bars, cameras and microphones pressed forward like they could push their way inside. Daniel walked to the center, hands visible, posture calm. Grace and Ava stood behind him. Several feet back, Ava's fingers slid into Grace's palm. Grace squeezed back, whispering, whatever happens, don't let go. Daniel began speaking. Voice firm but quiet. I'm Daniel Hartwell, he said. And I've heard the accusations. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones rose. Flashes burst. Daniel raised one hand. Not aggressive, just asking for space. My sister and my CFO stole from our foundation, he said. And when I confronted them, they threatened to destroy me. A wave of noise surged. Daniel continued, eyes steady. I'm also here to say something else. Something I hid for too long. He took a breath. I was suicidal, he said simply. I reached a point where I did not want to live. The world seemed to pause for half a second, like even chaos needed a moment to process honesty. Grace felt her breath stop. Ava's grip tightened. Daniel kept going. I walked alone last night because I wanted to disappear, he said. And I was stopped by a child who had no idea who I was and who gave me her last $5 because I looked cold. Reporters erupted again, shouting. She wasn't manipulated, Daniel said firmly, voice rising just slightly. She didn't know my name. She didn't know my money. She saw a human being shaking in the rain and decided he mattered. If you want to attack someone, attack me. But you will not use a little girl's kindness as a weapon. Grace's eyes filled with tears, hot and unstoppable. Ava stared at Daniel, stunned, her mouth slightly open. Said it. He protected her. He didn't hide behind her. He stood in front. If you believe love still wins, even when the world turns cruel. Comment. Amen. Let's put some hope in the comments. Somebody reading right now might be fighting their own dark night. One reporter screamed. Is this a publicity stunt? Are you saying a child saved you? Daniel turned toward the gate toward Grace and Ava, and for the first time he softened. Yes, he said. She saved me. Ava's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Grace, voice trembling. Mom. He stayed. Grace pulled Ava into her arms and nodded, crying silently. He stayed. Behind the cameras, a black SUV rolled up. A woman stepped out, heels sharp on wet pavement, hair perfectly styled, smile cold as glass. Lena Hartwell. Daniel's face tightened instantly. She approached the crowd like she owned it. And when she saw Daniel through the gate, her smile widened. Brother. She called, voice smooth and venomous, making confessions now. How noble. Grace felt Ava's body tense. Daniel stepped forward one pace, voice calm. It's over, Lena. Lena laughed softly. Over? This is just beginning. Her eyes flicked past Daniel, landing on Ava. And Grace's blood turned to ice because Lena wasn't just looking, she was calculating. And in that look, Grace understood what the real battle would be. Not money. Not headlines, but protecting a little girl whose $5 had become a spotlight. And a target. Grace stepped forward instinctively, placing her body between Ava and the gate, as if her arms could block a billionaire's cruelty. Ava pressed into her mother's side, eyes wide, clutching her drawing like it could keep the world gentle. Daniel saw it too. For a second, his calm cracked. A flicker of anger crossed his face, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that sharpens into protectiveness. He took one step toward the gate, voice low but firm. Don't look at her, he said. Lena's smile didn't move. I'm looking at the storyline, she replied smoothly. The child savior. The tragic billionaire. It's almost poetic. Daniel's jaw tightened. She's not a storyline. She's a child. Lena lifted her hands in mock innocence. Relax, I'm not the villain you're painting me to be. I'm the one cleaning up your mess. The reporters surged, hungry for conflict. Miss Hartwell, did you steal from the foundation? Is Daniel lying? Were you involved in threats? Lena turned to the cameras, smile flawless. My brother is unwell, she said calmly. He's admitted it himself, and when someone is unwell, they can be convinced of anything, even by a charming little encounter in the rain. Grace's stomach twisted with rage. Daniel's hands curled into fists. He forced them open again, showing the crowd he wasn't dangerous, even when provoked. Lena's eyes glinted. And that little girl, I'm sure she's sweet, but children don't understand complex situations. They can be used. Ava's lower lip trembled. Grace whispered fiercely, Don't listen, don't you listen. Daniel stepped forward again, voice rising. Stop, right now. Lena's smile widened. Oh, or what? Daniel's eyes hardened. Or I'll show the world the evidence, he said. The bank trails. The recorded threats. The documents you thought you buried. I've stayed quiet to protect our family name, but you already destroyed it. The crowd went silent, leaning in. Lena's expression flickered, just a crack, then smoothed again. She tilted her head. You wouldn't, she whispered. You're too sentimental. Daniel stared her down. I'm not sentimental anymore, he said quietly. I'm awake. Mr. Keller stepped closer behind Daniel, speaking under his breath. We can file a restraining order immediately. And an injunction against using the child's identity? Grace swallowed hard. Do it. Ava looked up at Grace, voice tiny. Mom, am I in trouble? Grace's heart shattered. She knelt, cupped Ava's face gently, and forced her voice to stay soft. No, she whispered. You are not in trouble. You are the best thing in this entire mess. Ava's eyes filled with tears. But they're mad, Grace nodded slowly. People get mad when kindness exposes how ugly they are. Daniel heard that. His eyes softened briefly toward Grace, grateful. Then he turned back to Lena, voice steady. You're done, he said. With the foundation, with my life, and with her. Lena's eyes narrowed. You can't protect her forever. Daniel took a slow breath. I don't need forever, he said. I need today. And tomorrow. Until she's safe enough to be a child again. Lena scoffed, turning back to the reporters. You see? She said, spreading her hands. Grand statements, drama. He wants to be a hero. Daniel didn't flinch. I'm not a hero, he said into the noise. I'm a man who almost died. And a child reminded me I still had a choice. That's it. A reporter shouted, Is the child here now? Grace's body went rigid. Daniel snapped his head toward the microphones, eyes blazing. No, he lied immediately, without hesitation. She's not. Grace blinked, stunned. Daniel was protecting Ava, even from the crowd's curiosity. Lena's gaze sharpened. She looked directly at Grace, then down at Ava just for a second. It was enough. Grace felt a cold certainty settle in her bones. Lena now knew exactly where to aim. Daniel seemed to sense it too. He stepped back from the gate, voice low to Mr. Keller. Move them, he said. Now. Keller nodded, already signaling security. Grace scooped Ava into her arms. Ava was small, but fear made her cling tight. Grace carried her quickly toward the guest house, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Behind them, Daniel remained near the gate, a lone figure holding the storm at bay. Ava turned her head over Grace's shoulder, eyes wide. Daniel, she called softly, voice cracking. Daniel looked toward her instantly, his expression changing, hardness melting into tenderness. He lifted his hand and gave her a small wave. Then he placed his hand over his heart. Slowly, deliberately, an unspoken promise. I'm here. I'm staying. Ava buried her face in Grace's neck, sobbing silently. Inside the guest house, Grace set Ava down on the couch and locked the door even though security was everywhere. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone. What if she comes here? Grace whispered, voice trembling. Mr. Keller stood by the window, scanning the property. She won't get past the gate, he said. But she can still do damage in other ways. Media, legal traps. We're preparing for all of it. Ava curled into a ball on the couch, hugging her knees. I just wanted to help, she whispered. Grace sat beside her, pulling her close. I know, baby, I know. If this story is touching you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for drama, not for the rich man, but for Eva, the little soul who gave her last $5 and still chose kindness when the world tried to punish it. One click is your way of saying, I see you, Ava, and your goodness matters. Ava sniffled, eyes red. Mom, do you think I should have kept the money? Grace's heart clenched. She looked at her daughter, small, trembling, brave, and realized the truth. No, she whispered. because $5 fed your stomach for one day, but what you did fed someone's life. Ava's chin trembled, but now people are yelling. Grace kissed her forehead. And that's why we protect you. Because the world loves kindness until it costs something. Outside, the noise slowly faded as security pushed the media back. Daniel's voice could still be heard faintly, calm and controlled. Then silence returned, thick and uneasy. Mr. Keller's phone buzzed again. He listened, face tightening. Grace's stomach dropped. "What?" she whispered. Keller lowered the phone slowly. "Lena filed an emergency motion," he said quietly. "She's claiming Daniel is mentally unfit and that his assets and decisions should be placed under temporary control." Grace froze, and she's also requesting, Keller added, voice careful, to interview the child involved. As a key witness, Grace's blood ran cold. Ava's eyes widened in terror. Grace pulled her close, shaking. "No," she whispered. "Absolutely not. You are not touching my daughter." Across the property, Daniel stood alone near the gate, staring into the dark, breathing hard, not from fear of losing money, but from fear that the world might reach for the one innocent person who had saved him. He turned away from the cameras at last and walked back toward the guest house, face set with a promise stronger than any legal document, because now the fight wasn't just for his name. It was for Ava's safety and the right for her kindness to remain pure. Asterisk, the next morning, the sky was clear in a way that felt unfair blue and calm, as if the world hadn't tried to drag a child into a war overnight. Grace hadn't slept. She sat at the kitchen counter with cold coffee, staring at her phone like it might explode with another notification. Ava dozed on the couch under a blanket, cheeks still damp from last night's tears. Every few minutes, she twitched in her sleep, like her dreams were still trying to run. A soft knock came at the door. Grace jolted, heart racing. "Grace," Daniel's voice called gently from outside. "It's me." She exhaled shakily and opened the door. Daniel stood there in a simple sweater, no suit, no polished CEO look, just a man with tired eyes and something determined in his posture. He stepped inside quietly, as if the house belonged to Grace and Ava more than it ever belonged to him. He glanced at Ava sleeping. His expression softy so deeply it hurt to watch. "She shouldn't be afraid because of me," he whispered. Grace's voice was rough. "Then fix it," Daniel nodded. "I'm going to." He sat at the table across from Grace, hands folded like he was about to confess something heavier than money. "I spoke to my lawyers all night," he said. "Lena wants to question Ava. She wants to put her in front of cameras and twist her words until her kindness looks like manipulation." Grace's nails dug into her palm. "Over my dead body." Daniel held her gaze. "That's why I'm doing something no one expects." Grace blinked. "What?" Asterisk. Daniel took a slow breath, then slid a folder across the table. Grace opened it carefully. Inside were signed papers, already notarized. A protective order request, a media injunction, and something else that made Grace's breath stop. Daniel Hartwell's voluntary transfer of control of the foundation to an independent board. Temporarily, Grace stared, stunned. "You're giving up control?" Daniel nodded. "Lena's argument is that I'm unfit because I'm emotional," he said, "so I'm removing the weapon from her hands. I'm stepping back by choice on my terms, so she can't force it and claim victory." Grace's eyes stung. "But your foundation, your life," Daniel's voice broke slightly. "My life is what Ava gave back to me," he said. "And if I have to let go of power to protect the one innocent person in this story, then that's not loss. That's repayment." Grace's throat tightened painfully. She'd met rich men before on TV, in news clips, in posters asking for donations. But she'd never met one willing to lose status to protect a little girl he didn't even know a week ago. Daniel leaned forward. "I'm also going to do something else," he said quietly. I'm going to tell the court the full truth. Not the polished truth, Grace swallowed. That you were suicidal, Daniel nodded. Yes, and that Ava's identity will not be revealed. I will not say her name. I won't show her face. I'll take every hit myself. Grace stared at him, struggling to trust a world that had never protected her face. I'll take every hit myself. Grace stared at him, struggling to trust a world that had never protected her. And if the court orders her anyway? She whispered. Daniel's eyes hardened. Then I fight, he said. And I don't stop. A small sound came from the couch. Ava stirred, blinking sleepily. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. When she saw Daniel, she froze for half a second, like she needed to confirm he was still real. Hi, Ava, Daniel said softly. Ava's voice was tiny. Are you leaving? Daniel's chest tightened. He stood and walked toward her slowly, then crouched near the couch, keeping a respectful distance. No, he said firmly. I'm not leaving. Ava studied his face carefully. But the yelling people? Daniel nodded. They can yell. They can lie. But they can't make me disappear unless I let them. Ava's eyes filled with tears again. Promise? She whispered. Daniel's throat bobbed. He didn't answer with the old kind of promise, the kind that sounds nice and breaks later. He answered with something better. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, plain object, a worn $5 bill, framed in clear plastic like a tiny museum piece. I kept it, he said softly. Not because of the money, because it reminds me who I want to be. Ava stared at it, breath-catching. That was mine. Daniel nodded. And you gave it away. That's why it matters. He placed the framed bill in Ava's hands gently. Ava held it like it was fragile glass. Daniel's voice trembled. I can't promise life will always be safe, he said. But I can promise this. I will choose to stay. I will choose to protect you. And I will choose to do what's right, even if it costs me. Ava's tears spilled. She leaned forward and hugged him, suddenly small arms wrapping around his neck. Daniel froze, then his arms slowly, carefully wrapped around her, like he'd been waiting his whole life to be allowed into that kind of innocence. Grace watched, crying quietly. It wasn't just gratitude, it was healing. Weeks later, the court denied Lena's request to involve Ava. The injunction held. Daniel stepped back from control, and the independent board began an investigation that uncovered the theft cleanly, publicly. Undeniably, Lena's perfect smile finally cracked on live television when the evidence surfaced. Her voice didn't sound smooth anymore. It sounded desperate. Michael Reeves resigned before he could be arrested, and Daniel? He didn't rebuild his image with speeches. He rebuilt it with choices. He funded a community program and Ava's neighborhood free meals for children, mental health support for adults, tutoring programs led by people who understood poverty wasn't laziness. It was a cage. Grace received treatment for her wrists. She got stable work that didn't destroy her body. For the first time in years, she laughed without immediately feeling guilty. And Ava stayed a child. She went back to school with lunch in her bag and light in her eyes. She kept drawing pictures, only now the sun in them looked bigger. One afternoon, months later, Ava stood on the same apartment steps where she'd met Daniel in the rain. But this time, it wasn't cold. It wasn't dark. Daniel stood beside her, looking out at the street like it held ghosts. Ava tugged his sleeve. Do you miss being sad? She asked seriously. Daniel let out a soft laugh through wet eyes. No, but I remember it. So I never go back alone. Ava nodded, satisfied. Then she pointed at a man across the street who looked tired, shoulders slumped. Should we help him? She asked. Daniel looked where she pointed. He took a slow breath, then smiled. Yes, he said. We should. Moral. Sometimes the biggest miracles don't arrive in limousines. Sometimes they arrive as a child's small hand offering the last thing she owns. And the world may try to punish that kind of goodness because true kindness exposes what greed tries to hide. But if you choose to stay soft in a hard world, you don't just change one life. You start a chain of light that keeps spreading one brave human choice at a time.